Well, that was the shortest and most concise Astro Weather I've ever done. Apologies for that. For whatever reason, the end stream button grabbed my attention and possessed me. And that's what I did. But we're back. And thank you for hanging in there and hanging around and following up the on the other side of it. What's going on, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and you are you, and it is the 4th of July. So I thought I would indulge in a little Astro Weather. I'm not going to do 15 minutes of flame today because we have so many preparations to take care of for our grand celebration on Saturday. And it sounds to me like we're going to have a lot of people coming over, which is cool. And hopefully some of you I'll meet for the first time, and we'll commingle with maybe my neighbors as well. That'll be always interesting. I kind of see, this is how I kind of see it. I kind of see Chattaria, my neighbors, as one of those weird jello molds where there's all this stuff on the inside and some of it probably doesn't fit, right? Like maybe you've got marshmallows, maybe you're kind of crazy, you throw like a half a walnut in there every now and then. Maybe you've got a grape, banana, right? That's what it feels like. It feels like one of those crazy jello molds. And somehow it might work. It might work. I think it'll be interesting to cross-pollinate with the locals. You know, back in Stonewall, we really didn't have that, which was really cool. It was like a compound. We had all this parking for cars and everything. It was an awesome place to have get-togethers. This is much more suburban. I can't wait till some of my neighbors get to meet Emily Moyer. That'll be a mix and match, won't it? That'll be a crazy synthesis. I really hope my neighbors come. Like, who are these people? What are these people about? And one of the cool things about Chattaria and sort of what we would call the community is that a lot of people in this community are like come from really respected backgrounds. Like Jane Barnholt, who I believe is coming. Jane Barnholt is a therapist, right? She's full-blown, credited, working therapist. Right? I think Leanne is coming with Jane, and Leanne has spent years and years and years in the insurance business. Right. So these are people that we've got Rod coming from San Antonio. He's an architect. We've got Steve coming from Harper, California. He's an architect. Right. So there are all these people. Joan, she's a dentist. Like all these people with these really like kind of high level mainstream gigs. And then there's this other side that kind of goes along. It's sort of like the story beneath the story. And I love that. I love that about this community, right? And that on one level, everybody kind of appears sort of straight and can fit in, but you just go a couple layers beneath the surface and then, whoa, look out. The stories come out, the divergent personalities emerge, and it's a beautiful thing, right? I want to play center field and just kind of watch this whole thing unfold. I really hope my neighbors come and show up. I think they will. They'll at least come by to say hi, right? Have a soda or whatever. And then we're going to be graced by the presence of Axel, the history kid, which is always a fun thing. Because every time I see him, he's got bigger. And it's like, whoa, what happened to Well, he was always not small. He was always a big kid. But what happened to that not so small young kid that I met a couple of years ago, right? So it'll be a really, really good time, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to it. So, how is everybody today? How are you going to spend your Fourth of July? We have no time constraints today, so we can go as long as we can or want to. I don't have to cut it straight off at 9 a.m. We go run over and go do the other show so we can leisurely hang out, get into the astrology. And today is, we have a really interesting start of the day. One of my favorite presidents of all time, Calvin Coolidge, is today's star of the day. So I'm just giving you a heads up. Only president born on the 4th of July, and probably one of the best presidents in the history of the United States of America for a number of reasons. But let's go through and say hi to the folks that are here. I was just about to do that before I hit the wrong, you hit the wrong button and you can start a fucking war, right? I mean, you just hit that wrong button and the world changes. History changes. The timeline shifts when you hit the wrong button. Garden Girl, she's here. What's happening? Happy 4th. Warlanda, double clutch. It happens. Thanks, Warlanda. Appreciate that. Green Ant Crew. Green Ant Crew. I love that name. Take two. Thank you. Big Dave Sullivan is here. What's going on, Dave? Mary Lee, happy 4th, y'all. Going to be a scorcher in the Ville of Nash. It's going to be pretty hot out here as well. Magic Cat, too funny. I know. Sometimes we have to chuckle at our own, I wouldn't call it misfortune. Chuckle at one's own folly. Let's have a good chuckle at our folly. Brandy Herrera, rumor is Brandy Herrera is going to make a sighting here. I guess we're going to have to save a space for your RV or something. Don't worry about it. We'll find a place to park your tortoiseshell. Maya Rose, buenos dias, Maya Rose. Athena, Grand Rising, hello, Athena. Kelly B, hope you're all hydrated, up and running. The great Esperanza Vince Tarot is with us, misbehaving too. What's happening? Monica Farrow, happy 4th to you. The great state of Louisiana, where my father was born, in Shreveport. My grandmother could not say Shreveport, and she could not say shrimp either. So at least she was consistent. She would say, she would call Shreveport, Shreveport. And she would call shrimp. She couldn't do the SH. Very odd. Very odd. Kind of endearing in some ways. Let's see. Rainbows and butterflies. Soul Travelers here. Let's see. Better late than never. Sharon, you're right on time. Moira, New York City. How's that lifeguard job going? Did Adams fill all those positions with all those people that are really good at swimming because they crossed the fucking Rio Grande? That was one of the stupidest fucking things. Like, every time you think Eric Adams can't say anything more stupid, he manages to come up with something more stupid. And for me, I have to take it a little personally because Eric Adams is a Virgo rat. Like me, like, show up, motherfucker. You know, come on. Jeez. Represent. But you know, it's the thing about him though, he is really ratty. Like, he ratted his way all the way to the top. Right? He's like the king rat of New York. And he thinks he's got all the cheese. But the cheese is chocolate. It's chocolate cheese. Finca Feliz, then you're right on time. There's my man Steve. Jello mold with cat food in it. Oh man. So Jello, right? Jello is aspic. That's where it comes from. And aspic was considered to be a delicacy, and so aspic was basically fat, right? What they would do is they would kind of render fat, right, and kind of melt it down, and then they would put it in some kind of a mold, and then they would put things inside of the aspic, and then of course the fat would harden, and then you would have this kind of dish, right? Aspic. So Jello became a consumer version of aspic. Anyway, uh, Nor Rashid, the Queen of Speed. Are you selling some RVs today? We do actually have a wonderful country regardless of what's happening in Washington. Um, Let us affirm and decree the fact that we as a country are still afforded some degree of freedom and the spirit of independence. I mean, I really think that this is the thing that this experiment, whatever you think of it, however it was created, whoever's behind it or still behind it, right? There are still principles that are part of like the genetic, we'll call it the genetic matrix of the United States. And one of them is this idea of an independent spirit. That if you have an idea or you are motivated to do something, that the environment um, allows you, to the best of your ability, to uh, achieve that or participate in uh, the manifestation of it. Right? You get to try things out here. You get to test on things. Right? If you have a garage, you can build things. You can sort of bootstrap something. Right? What I'll give you just a current example. There are lots of people, you know, going into the countryside, right? They're moving away from the cities. They're going off grid. Like there are serious numbers that support this, and this is a very American. I mean, it goes. Surviving on the land is not an American patent, right? But there is something about that is very much a part of the American story. Again, you want to call it colonialism, whatever, right? A lot of people had to really, scratch and claw their existence in fairly hostile territories in this country, in specifically Texas. When the Germans came to Texas, they had no fucking idea what they were getting into. Right? They were just ants. There were just these ads, right, in these newspapers about Texas and Germany and Germany. This is all around 1848, 1849, and it's the great revolutions of Europe, and Germany is the hotbed. Right? Marxism is really cutting through Germany like a hot knife through butter. It's creating a lot of discord, and people wanted to leave the sort of the socioeconomic chaos of Germany at that time. And so, what was interesting is that you got kind of both groups leaving from Germany. There were Marxists that left Germany that came to the United States with the idea that they could have their own Marxist paradise, which didn't do very well. And then you had these other Germans who just wanted to, carve out a piece of the land in their life. So they were basically said that it's like, hey, come get this land. And if you've ever been to Texas, many of you have been and live here. Um, a lot of the conditions in Texas are quite hostile. it's not like California where it's like, holy shit, we've just stepped into paradise. I mean, the hill country is really nice, and we have rivers here and wells here, and it's probably one of the nicer areas in Texas. But still, like coming here, you have to deal with intense heat, like levels of heat that the Germans were not used to. On a hot day in Germany, you might hit maybe the low 90s on a hot summer day in Germany. That's temperate here in July and August, and in many days you're stringing multiple 100-degree days together, right? So you have the weather, just the weather alone. Then you have what, like fucking poisonous snakes. Again, not you may run into a few of them every now and then in Germany, but nothing like you'll run into in Texas. You have scorpions, and sometimes these scorpions are fucking huge, right? So then there's mosquitoes. I mean, all the things that just went along with the environment, right? And then you're gonna carve out a future. Now you get into the Apache and the Comanche, who are already here, right? And they're like, hey, we don't like you being here, and then they got to deal with them. And the interesting thing is that the Apache and the Comanche, they didn't get along with other Indian tribes either, right? They wreaked havoc with all the other tribes. Like you can go, straight up from Texas, and cut up through the center of the country, right? And these were a band of very intense people, and they were horse thieves, and so they were. It wasn't like they just had it out for the Germans. They were very territorial, and they were ass kickers on a lot of the other tribes. So then the Germans had to deal with the Apaches and the Comanche, and they were phenomenal in terms of their ability to ride horses and to shoot. Right, they could literally ride a horse at a full gallop, and then hang on the other side of the horse, use the horse as a shield, and then fire a rifle. I mean, that's how agile these people were, and that's how adept they were at these raiding parties. And they would steal German kids. There's a number of books where these German kids get stolen, and they're raised by Apaches. And there's this one that's pretty famous. And eventually he comes back to his German family, and he feels like a fish out of water, right? Because he learned a very different kind of life, and he really didn't like the German lifestyle that he was supposed to embrace again. So these are the conditions that, and I'm just talking about the Germans in Texas. You can expand that out into any other territory in the States, and you're dealing with a variation of the same condition. But then the Germans get caught up in the fucking Civil War, right? And it's like Texas is supposed to fight on the side of the South, and the Germans were like, "Well, we don't want any part of this. We're not. We had. They're like the Muhammad Ali of their day, right? We got no beef here." So the Germans would actually send their young men out away from places like Fredericksburg or New Braunfels or whatever. They'd send them out because the Confederacy would come to town, and they'd start looking for young men to go fight in the war, and they'd leave. And sometimes they'd get captured, and they'd have to throw on the uniform. And go. Luckily, the war didn't last too incredibly long after that. Whatever that war was, anyway, it's a whole other story. But man, the Germans got caught up in a real shit show. And again, pioneering and carving out this land was no easy feat. I can tell you that. You try to grow something here in Texas, even with plenty of water, it's really a challenge. So I mean, this is part of our story, and a lot of people are going back to the land, and they're doing their best to go off grid. You know, and you see somebody like Thomas Massie, who to me really, to me, Thomas Massie just typifies the spirit of being an American. When I think of a real American, I think of Thomas Massie. Like he embodies the totality of the American story. He's raised in the poorest county in Kentucky, and he has a dream. And his dream is that he wants to go to MIT. He's never even seen a picture of MIT, but he believes that it's the place for him. And because he grew up on a farm where there wasn't any real television, there weren't any malls or movie theaters to distract him, he began to build things. You know, he's like, okay, well, what can I do with myself here? Right. So he began to build things. And one of the first things he built was for his grandmother, who liked to travel. And when she traveled, her houseplants would dry up and die. And so the first thing he built was a self-watering plant system for his grandmother. Right. And it's like, how American is that? There's a problem. Let me solve the problem. Right. So he typifies that spirit from a very early age. He does so well in school that MIT accepts him on a scholarship. Not only that, but he goes there with his high school sweetheart. And they both go to MIT together, and they both start a business together. And the business is incredibly successful. And it's not just some junk business, right? It's a VR tool that provides immense value to people who can use it in a way that enables them to access information in a way that they normally can't do it, right? It's a very successful company. And then they sell the company. Isn't that what you're supposed to do theoretically? Have a good idea, put in the sweat equity, build the thing that you're going to build. The thing that you build provides value for others, creates jobs, and then he goes back to Kentucky, and then he starts all over again. And he builds his house basically from fucking scratch, right? The wood on the land, the rocks on the land. Like, it almost sounds too good to be fucking true, but that's what he does. And you know, and it's like his Monticello, you know, born out of the, you know, the rocks and the fallen trees. He digs out his own well, right? And then once he establishes this, and he wants to be free, he wants to be off the grid. He doesn't have a problem with alternative energy, particularly personal solar. So what does he do? He finds a wrecked Tesla and uses the wrecked Tesla's battery to power his entire house, which is still probably one of the better batteries you can get to do something like that. So he's innovative, right? And he's, you know, this is what Americans do, right? We look around and say, oh, somebody else's trash is my treasure, and let me do something with that. And then as a byproduct of him just wanting to be free, right, to live the American dream, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is what Thomas Massie was exercising in his life. And like most Americans, here comes the government, and they start to encroach. And it's like, well, what can we do with this person's property? What can we do with this person's taxation? Right? So now all of a sudden, because Thomas Massie has built something up, and perhaps other people inspired by Thomas Massie in the area are doing similar things, now the government wants a slice of their pie. And Thomas Massie's like, well, hold on a second. You weren't responsible for any of this. Like, I did this. Why should I give you something that I created out of my own sweat and my own muscle from the materials that were a part of my, why do you get a piece of this? And so that's where it all started with him. And it started with a letter to an editor in the local paper. which got a lot of response. And so when he did that, of course, what does city government do? Well, they ratchet it up. They're like, oh, we got one here. You know, there's the head of a nail. Let's get the hammer, right? So then they ratchet it up. And it's like, okay, well, now we got to go to the next level. He goes to basically like a county commissioner meeting or something like that. And again, he's speaking about this proposed tax that they want to levy for whatever stupid fucking reason. And he gets up there and he speaks for 5 minutes, and they say, okay, Mr. Massie, your time is up. And then the guy behind him says, I yield my time to Mr. Massie. And this goes on all night, right? Every person just gives them their fun because he's so articulate. He understands the message. He understands the core of the problem. He understands how to attack it. He understands the principle and basically turns everything on its ears. And then, of course, they walk out of that meeting victorious. That is the legend of Thomas Massie. That's where it's born. And those people have been loyal to him from day one. They were the ones that got him elected more than once in the midst of a hailstorm of money coming in from AIPAC to defeat him. Thomas Massie is the embodiment of the American spirit. When it came time to, sending your tax dollars over to Ukraine or your tax dollars to Israel, Thomas Massie stood in the fire, right? He's like Bob Seger against the wind, right? And he stood there and he took the bullets for all the Americans who feel exactly the same as he does, but have no voice and no representation whatsoever. He said no. He vehemently said no. When Donald Trump wanted to just unilaterally pass the omnibus spending bill, Thomas Massie realized that it could not happen if one person was there on the floor of the Congress to, at the very least, make that an official act of Congress. And he went there, and this is during COVID, and he forced everybody else's hand to go there to have to vote on this bill, right? And he got there 3 days in advance just to make sure that he was going to be there and that they couldn't pull any bullshit like they did when they passed the Federal Reserve Act. Right? He basically stayed in his truck for 3 days eating peanut butter pretzels and drinking water just so he could make the government go through the paces to take accountability for that vote. That is an American. That's an American. He embodies the spirit of America. And it is such a tragic loss that this man's wife passed away suddenly. And it's almost like this is it's like, is this the price you pay for being an American, for standing up for those God-given rights, right? God-given rights. These are not rights given to you by the government. They are not. They are your God-given inalienable rights. Well, I guess there's a price to pay for that. And the price to pay is, if not your mortality, the mortality of somebody dear to you. And we still don't have a lot of information, but we do know that the word suddenly is part of the narrative. It'll be very interesting to see how Thomas Massie responds to this, because he's a good man, and I know that he's a Christian, whatever that means to you, right? So he's taught not to have any hate in his heart. This is a very, very it's like his cross. It's a cross moment for him, really, right? It's a real cross moment. Like he could have so much hate in his heart if he does his forensics, and for whatever reason, nothing adds up to the passing of his wife. Boy, could that just become like a poison well in his heart? Interesting choice of words. A poison well in his heart. So Massie has to go through this, right? He has to go through this fire. He has to transform all of this and be forged by it, and at the same time not lose any of his focus and commitment. And he won't. He won't. He's a Capricorn. He's got Mars and Scorpio, right? This guy's made of tough stuff. And you know what? I'll even give him some space here, right? If he decided that he wanted to take a sabbatical and take time and not jump back in the ring, and maybe not jump back in the ring ever again, I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't blame him, and I wouldn't lose any respect for the guy. So if he just says fuck it, I've had it with this bullshit. I've had it with Washington. I've had it with you international satanic networks. I'm going to live my life, and I'm okay with that. And if he decided to do that, I'm okay with it, right? But that's the guy who typifies the American spirit, in my estimation. And it's still there. It's still available, and more people are moving onto the land and growing off grid than ever before, because they know what's coming. They know it's coming, and what's coming ain't pretty, right? It's not pretty. So, what are the values that we are supposed to embody, right? As theoretical Americans, based on the sign of Cancer, we embody family, right? Loyalty, character. Cancer, as we get into Calvin Coolidge, is a sign that's connected to being thrifty and conservative. Cancer shops at thrift stores. Cancer buys used cars, not flashy new cars, right? I mean, this is the embodiment of sort of the American spirit. Sewing your own clothes. I mean, I know there are people in chat whose parents made their own clothes, right? There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong. This is kind of where we started. This is what and we still have. This is the value of the spirit, right? And also being able to help your neighbors. It's a very Cancerian thing. It's all very local. Like if you went back into those periods of time where you were trying to settle in a hostile territory. Again, whatever you think of colonialism, every fucking part of this realm has been conquered over again and again and again, many times. Right? It's just part of the Earth story. There's no other noble way to spin it. Right? It is what it is. Hell, it even happened to the Palestinians. The problem is that it's still happening to the Palestinians. That's a different story. But if you were a neighbor, right? Like you had to watch out for your neighbor's property. You had to help each other. So you had to form bonds. Because if you didn't form those bonds, then your alliances, your interests, your property, it became weaker. It was more susceptible to whatever, right? And if you had something happen to your property, the idea is that your neighbor would come in and help you out, right? Pitch in, because you would do the same for your neighbor. If something happened to your neighbor, it's like, man, that could be me. That could be my misfortune. So let me lend a hand here. I had a reading yesterday. So I'm going to give you an example, okay? And why this goes back to Nora's statement and why this is still important. I had a client yesterday who listens to this, and he's probably listening to this today. He's an absolutely great guy. Great guy. He's a Canadian. I won't hold it against him. No, I'm just kidding. But he's originally from Albania. And he told me his story about growing up in Albania as a youth, and it is not a pretty story, right? It is not a pretty story. They were communist. His father was in prison for 4 years, imprisoned by the Russians for being a political prisoner, right? I mean, just think about that for a second. Think about your father. You're young, right? We all have issues with our families, whatever. But you're young and your father, and all of a sudden he's gone. He's gone for 4 years, 5 years. You don't see him. And you're asking these questions. Well, what happened to Papa? What happened to Papa? What happened to Dada? What happened to Dad? Right? And then they got to concoct some kind of a story. You know, because in the Soviet Union, right? If you said, oh well, the fucking state took your father away because he complained about the fact that the state took his tractor, right? What's going to happen to that kid? He's going to have that story. He's going to go run around. He's going to go tell, you know, my papa got taken away because they took away his tractor and he didn't like it. Well, if you lived in a country in the Soviet Union, somebody would be rewarded for ratting on you, right? So you couldn't even tell your kid the true story for fear that he'd go out and say something that would jeopardize him and you in whatever tenuous hold you had on your material existence, right? So you couldn't even get the straight story. Oh, Papa went away for a while. He'll be back, right? Like that's what happened. You know, I used to know this woman. God bless her. She's probably not in this realm anymore. But she was a really good friend of mine. Really, really good friend of mine. And she beautiful. This woman was beautiful. And she was Hungarian. And she looked like one of the Gabor sisters, truly young. And she came home one day to her apartment where her father was, and her father was shot and killed. Somebody inside of the Soviet Union, the Czechia, whatever, right, came in and killed her father. So she comes home, opens the door, and there he is, lying on the floor, bullet in his head. That's what they did, right? That's what they did. So just line that world up with this world. Line it up with this world. And we may have it worse than we did 20 years ago. But compared to that, don't sleep on your freedom, whatever that is. You may say, well, you're not really free because you haven't reclaimed your name. You know, you're still paying property tax, and all those things can be true, right? But in this regard, freedom's quite relative. You know, even in Russia today, if you were to speak out against Putin, your ass is in prison, right? If you were to question the Holocaust under Putin, your ass is in the prison. If you were to, dare to question Jewish power in Russia, your ass is in the prison, right? Go to China. Social credit score. You complain enough, and guess what? You're in a van on the way to the airport, right? And you know what that means? That means that you are an organ donor. You know how they harvest organs? They harvest them live. Yes, live. And you're in the van on the way to the airport, right? And if you have a couple of really good kidneys, snip, snip, right? Into the ice cold storage it goes, onto the plane it goes, into a body that's paying for it somewhere else. That's what happens. You complain too much in some of these other countries, you're going to find out real fast the consequences of that. And I'm not saying that that can't happen here. In fact, it's getting worse. We're headed more in that direction than we've ever headed before. So I'm with Nora on this. Let us celebrate to the best of our ability the things that we have and still have. And damn it, don't let them take it away. Don't let them take it away. You'd be like Louis C.K. Well, let's just let everybody in. We have it too good here. It's not supposed to be like this. Well, Louis, why don't you invite him over to your house? Let him hang out with you for a while. The original idea of the country, and this is just my take. The original idea was to build this thing up to the point where everybody in the rest of the world would say, hey, I want that. I want that. And it wouldn't be about moving here. It'd be about, let's adopt that system. Let's adopt that system so that we can experience financial prosperity, innovation, and freedom to worship whatever God we want. And hopefully it's one that's positive and doesn't sacrifice kids, right? That was the idea. Make it so appealing that every other place in the world says, I want that shit. It didn't really work out that way. We took the kind of the worst fundamentals of that, right? Which is militarism and occupation. And then we took it to all these other countries. Say, we'll give you this, right? We'll give you this part of the country. The only time I think that it really made a really huge difference was when what's his name, Milton Friedman, went to Chile, and he took all of his economist buddies and went to Chile and basically turned Chile around and made it one of the most prosperous countries in Latin America. Why? Because he said there's too much government involved in what's going on here on the business side of things. And so you have to really limit that so that you can allow these people to build their businesses and not be hampered by onerous taxes or onerous restrictions or whatever the government wanted to get their fingers in, so that these people would always kind of remain sort of stunted, right? It's like that idea that if you smoke cigarettes or drink coffee when you were young, you wouldn't grow, right? It's kind of like it was like giving a 6-year-old a pack of Marlboros every day, right? It's kind of like that. And Friedman came along and he changed the game, right? It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect in this realm. Nothing. But of all the systems that were created, it's the one theoretically that has the most built-in safeguards, and it's still available, right? I mean, we'll even use Nora as an example, right? Like, Nora's not from this country. She's not from here. She's from another place that is a hell of a lot worse than this country is now, right? And what has she done? She's fucking built, a little empire in New Mexico, by taking advantage of the system, putting her nose to the grindstone, right? I'll give you another story. And this one is really weird. I promise we'll get to the astrology. But I don't know if we've been following this thing with Sheng Tao, who is she's a Cancer, by the way. She's the embattled mayor of Oakland. And Sheng Tao has got, one of the reasons she became mayor is that she got in bed with this family called the Duongs. And the Duongs, in a weird way, are part of the American story, right? They are the modern day version of the American story. They left Vietnam. They were actually very successful in Vietnam, the Duong family. But after the war, they're on a fucking boat like everybody else trying to get out of Vietnam. And they wind up in San Francisco, And I think there's like, I don't know, 11 of them, 14 of them. Like this is a big group of people. And they're in a 2-room flat in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. Like that's where they end up. So they look around and they say, all right, well, what can we do? Well, we're going to pool our money. We're going to buy a truck. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go around, we're going to take all this cardboard that people don't want, and we're going to recycle this cardboard. And that's how they started to make their money. And they just kept recycling and saving and recycling and saving and recycling. You know, they probably had some side hustles too, right? But that's what they did. And eventually they cross the bay, they go to Oakland, and they implement the same model, and they get this recycling contract with the city of Oakland to do what they were doing in San Francisco. And now they're starting to move up in the world, right? And they just become more powerful and more powerful. And they have this contract in San Jose for the same thing, right? And they're like becoming this. Within 2 decades, the Duongs go from living in a 2-room flat in the Tenderloin and recycling cardboard to becoming, you know, these waste management titans, you know, in the East Bay. Well, the other side of that story, which is part of the American story as well, is they start throwing money at politicians, right? And the politicians almost always do their bidding because they're just giving them money right and left. And they don't care who they're giving it to. Like, you know, they're the Rothschild model. Like, we'll give money to the Democrats. We'll give money to the Republicans. They gave money to Trump. They gave money to Hillary. It didn't fucking matter, right? Whoever was going to advance their cause got paid. Now, apparently, the Duongs have the underside or the underbelly of the American story as well, and that they got some trafficking going on, right? As part of all the other, you know, shenanigans with paying off politicians. A lot of the stuff with politicians is legal, by the way, right? Some of it, even though it's legal, is very underhanded. So one of the things that he did very early on was there was a mayor of Oakland named Elihu Harris, and one of Harris's aides, who became a very important person in sort of the building of the Duong dynasty. They went to Vietnam. Now, apparently Harris paid for the trip on his own dime, whatever. But that trip was incredibly important because it helped set the Duongs back up in Vietnam to start their own fucking waste management business in Vietnam and that's not easy because Vietnam is communist. You can't own anything. But they said, yeah, you can do business with us. You can do that here, right? And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they're bringing over the mayor of Oakland, and you know now they have clout, right? So it's an American story, but it's also sort of the dark side of the American story, right? It's sort of the, you know, the seedy, corrupt, get ahead by any means part of the American story, and that's part of it too, you know. For better or worse, right? Like we've taken in all these people over the years, the Italians, the Irish, the Germans who I spoke of, right? The Jews, right? They've all become part of the American story. And at certain points along the way, they all fucking have gangs because that's how you survive. When you come to a new place, you bond and you create gangs. That's what happens. You want to you want to pump up your financial value and worth as quickly as possible, right? You don't want to, you know, work for slave wages forever, right? You look around and say, okay, how do I get there? You know, how do I get to Mellon status or Carnegie status? Right? They're looking around and say, okay, well, Vice pays. How do you think the Kennedys made all their money? Right? They were a gang. They were a clan. And they made money off booze and other things. Part of the American story, right? And so there's a price to pay for that. And, you know, is the price, it's all risk reward. You know, but I think the Kennedys have paid a price. I think they paid a price for their ascent to power. Anyway, that's a different story altogether. So let's celebrate the day, right? Let's affirm and decree here in this country and for everybody else in the world, right? For everybody else in the world, that these values are universal, that your rights are inalienable and God-given, and I don't care what anybody else says, right? I don't care what anybody else says. They're inalienable and God-given. And it's up to you to defend them. And it's up to you to hold up your end of the bargain, whatever that is. And everybody's got an end of the bargain, right? I remember when I was a kid, I think this is quite American, actually. When I was a kid, my father my father was a tinkerer, right? He was a tinkerer. So he had a garage. It was like an American thing. He'd go out there, he'd tinker. Right? He was a jeweler. There was another time where he got into he started to get all these ideas and start to build shit. And one of these ideas that he had, I thought it was kind of funny. But he had this idea to create a suitcase that you could use for work, right? And it was made out of sort of this semi-clear, this lightly smoky, sort of black urethane. And so he built this suitcase, right? He built the fucking suitcase. And then he took one of those sort of digital light things, right? Like digital signage, like from back in the 70s or 80s, right? And so he created this thing that you could put in the suitcase, and it was like a billboard for your business. So if you had a business, let's say your business was, I don't know, taffy. You had a taffy business, which would seem silly, but we'll just use that. So the digital billboard inside the suitcase that you would carry around as your suitcase for work would advertise your taffy business, right? Like he would come up with shit like that. He did come up with this idea for a foldable table on wheels that I thought was genius. It was like a utility table. But what he would do is, I wasn't really into that stuff, right? I'd rather go out and play sports and smoke dope and do that shit, right? So what he would do is there would be like these, younger men, in their like 20s or late 20s, whatever. And a lot of times they needed like somebody to hang out with and kind of have a father figure, right? So my father would invite them over to hang out in the garage and work on shit and make shit. And he did this he started doing this when I was a kid. And there was this young guy that lived across the street from our house, and his name was Mike Corbin. And Mike Corbin loved coming over to our house to hang out with my dad in the garage and build shit. I just wasn't wired that way. And I thought to myself, should I be jealous of Mike Corbin because he's doing stuff with my dad? I'm like, no, I'm not really into it. Mike, enjoy his company, right? But I think that that's a really American thing to do. It's just one version of it. That's an American thing to do. You take somebody in and say, hey, let's do this together, or can I help you? Or let's build something. Let's nurture your skills or your talents, right? I remember as a kid, we had these neighbors that lived across the street from us, and it was the Hairston family, and they were the first Black family to move into our neighborhood. And I really liked them. I thought they were really cool. And I loved Dave Hairston, who was the dad. And because Dave had an Austin Healey with a Mustang engine in it. I thought that's fucking cool, right? So I'd go over to the Hairston's house, and he had kids, and they were a little bit younger than me. But I'd go over to their house, and AFX racing cars were really big at that time. And so I'd go over there, we'd play AFX racing cars. And in the other room, Dave and his buddy Terry would be watching football and drinking Old English, right? You hang out here, out there. It was a cool environment. We go to the field, football, fields at the school, play football and shit. And then they play music, right? It was the first time I heard Parliament was at their house. I'm like, man, this is fucking cool. I like this shit, right? So um, I told the Harrisons one time, I said, man, I really dig soul food. And I did. I love soul food. When I was a kid, I would go find these soul food restaurants. I'd make my parents take me to them. And so one holiday, my mother made some zucchini bread, right? And I took it over to the Harrisons. This is just in America. I mean, I know they do this in other countries, right? And I didn't expect anything back. But I'd say about 5 days later, David Harrison shows up at my door with a plate with aluminum foil over the top. And he says, here you go, it's for you. I said, oh, thanks. I go in, and it was the most fucking soul food of the soul food that I've ever had, right? It was my first experience with chitlins. So I had chitlins, I had potato salad, I had peach cobbler, right? This shit was good. This shit was authentic. And to me, again, that's an American. That's part of my American story growing up, right? It was just like, these are your neighbors, and you just do this, and you're kind, right? You're just kind. You just share stuff, right? And those things never go away. They never go away. Period. End of story. And those are universal values. They're human values. And those are the things that we need to defend. That's why I'm inviting my neighbors. Bring them on over. Let's get diverse. Right. Although they're not very diverse. I can tell you that right now. Not in a traditional sense. I also had another client yesterday, and we were talking about a lot of stuff. And I just realized it was, sometimes you just get that flash of like information and revelation. You never know where it's going to come from or when it's going to come. And so I'm talking with this guy, and he's a cool guy. And it just hit me like straight between my eyes. It's like, there's going to come a time in the not so distant future where people are going to walk away from the internet en masse. The time is coming where people are they're going to walk away. And it may not be next year or the year after, right? But I guarantee you, all right, we're back. Sorry about that. So it's just going to become too onerous. Like that, there's going to be that nexus point. Are you going? How willing are you going to be to sacrifice? We're already sacrificing our privacy. There is no privacy anymore. But how willing are you to go to that final length to prove who you are digitally to be on this thing? And there are going to be people who are going to have to make some very serious choices. And so much of our commerce and our ability to do business is digital and online, that the sacrifice is going to be very, very real and valid and challenging. You know, I do everything that I do through the internet. You know, God forbid I had to be an astrologer here in Texas. Instead of compensating me for my work, they probably string me up and set me on fire. I'm just kidding, sort of. But that's a choice, right? I mean, I'd have to make a choice. We'd all have to make choices based on that. So that's just a gateway choice. But I think there's other things that are going on here as well. Like the internet is not as interesting as it used to be. Period. End of story. Right? Dead internet. Things are just going away. They're being removed. You know, I was thinking about this yesterday. I remember, you know, going through YouTube back in like the 2010s. And I remember seeing these videos of like how people travel in other countries. Like I know they're still there, but they would just like pop up on my feed and they were fucking insane, right? Like they were just fucking insane. Like the trucks that they would use, the paths they would take, you know, like 500 people on top of a fucking bus, you know, on a precipice in a mountain somewhere in northern India, you know, and some of it was stupid shit too, right? Like I don't see those videos anymore. They all just, and I know they're there, but they were just readily accessible and available. In the old days of the internet, you had websites, you had to find people. And it was cool, right? And I remember the first time I found Dave McGowan. And, you know, and he started, I mean, I was there when he started to write about the Laurel Canyon. And I'm like, this is fucking great. You know, it was like a page turner. I couldn't wait for the next installment of Dave McGowan. And we don't really have that anymore. And I think it's kind of sad in a lot of ways because everything's become so centralized and there's so much of a cross pollination of information that it's almost like, you know, it just sort of deflates the value of everything now. You know what I mean? It's sort of, it's kind of like, you know, once digital tools came into music, it kind of devalued music in general, because you used to have to like know how to do shit in order to make music and produce it, and it made it more ubiquitous and more people could have a crack at it, and you didn't have to go through a studio. But it also devalued the product in a lot of ways. Just like I think Twitter and Facebook and a lot of these sites where they centralize information devalues information to a large extent because it's so ubiquitous, and you still have to sort through it, right? But it's not like, and a lot of it too is just repeater information. Now, these are people that are recycling and repasting and reposting other things. If you followed people in the 2010s, they had like really fucking original takes and did a lot of work. And I don't know. I don't want to sound like the get off my lawn guy, but at some point, people are going to walk away from the internet. Trust me on this. It's going to happen. And one of the things is going to be, it'll be attributed to people not wanting to opt into more stringent security measures. But it'll be more than that, right? I felt it strongly that at some point, people are just going to be like, enough, right? This is not interesting. it'll be kind of inexplicable. It's kind of like when the mines just disappeared. All of a sudden you'll just have a mass wave of people just no longer being online. And they'll be scratching their heads and say, where did they go? Well, they just got tired of it, right? They got tired of it. And that's going to happen. I guarantee you it'll happen. And it'll happen in our lifetime. All right. I'm ranting a bit. Sorry for the reset. All right, let's see some of these comments. We will get into the astrology, I promise. I promise. This is an astrology show. It's a mental health thing too, the walking away. What will be the alternative? Books, talking to people, creating things. That would be the alternative. Long time ago, right? Long time ago, this is back in the 90s when I used to think about these things. And I had this, in my head, I had this vision, right? And it had to do with censorship. And it had to do with biometrics. And it had to do with people opting out. This is in my head in the 90s, right? And as a result of opting out and not being a part of this, what happened is that people developed their psychic and intuitive abilities to a much greater degree and capacity. And that ultimately this externalization of this mind share in this global brain that we call the internet is really something that is already there, right? We're already hooked into it. This is just sort of the plumbing of that. And that by walking, I had this in the 90s, right? That ultimately the end result would be people would be able to communicate with each other telepathically over distance and time. Like that would happen, right? It's just the natural order of things. We evolve, right? And we've used a lot of this external technology as sort of the externalization of these internal tools that we all have. So what will people do? Well, ultimately, they'll develop their own psychic network, and they'll be able to communicate and talk with other people in other parts of the realm, maybe other dimensions, right? This is what will happen. Now, it may not happen in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. I got no problem with that, right? This has allowed us to do this in a way that the tools have given us the opportunity to do. But we have all this inside of us. Let's see. Used to love pen pal. Yeah. There you go. Books, talking to people. So how can you have a global reach? I communicate with people in other countries. That may not happen for a while, right? It may not happen for a while. Maybe the people in the other countries and you can tune into each other, right? Why not? I mean, we're supposed to have all these spiritual gifts, right? How do you develop them? Usually through some form of adversity. Let's see. What else do we have? Twilight the Mist. That's already happening, in my opinion. The more people become psychically sensitive, the more they walk away from the internet. Because the bleed over from the web connection is an overload factor. I would agree with that. Dionne Warwick, Psychic Network. I used to work for a psychic network, and I'm not unapologetic to admit that. I'm not unapologetic to admit that I worked for a psychic network. And this was in the 90s, all pre-internet, right? So I actually had to audition for this. I had to audition with the owners of the company for the gig. I had to drive to their office. They were professional psychics. I had to drive to their office in San Francisco and sit down with them and give them a reading, right? So it was totally legit. And they had partnered with this guy who used to work for AT&T. So they knew how to do the pay for phone stuff. And that was one of the most interesting gigs that I had ever had. And it was so fascinating. I was using tarot at the time to do these readings for people. But man, it was almost like remote viewing, to be honest with you. Like I was able to describe where people lived. I was able to describe what their husbands looked like. I was able to get into their husbands' habituations, you know, because mostly women, right? And it really was like a psychic network, to be honest with you. I mean, it was cool. I kind of, you know, in some ways I kind of miss it, but you know, that was just a moment in time. I had no problem admitting that I did that. Pen pals are good. Who didn't love getting a letter in the mail, right? Who didn't love getting a letter? That was like, even if you got it from, you know, like your grandparents. If you got it from your grandparents, you usually knew there was a little bit of money in that too. And on my mother's side, my grandparents were very formal, right? So they would make the card, the envelope out to Master Robert Morris. And I thought, that's a fucking cool name, man. I like that. Can we make that happen around the household here? Can we start adopting that a title here around the household? Dad, can you address me by this envelope? Let's just make it ubiquitous. Let's see. Randy Boggins gave that response once. Yes, he's right. Randy's right. He's totally right. Brandy Herrera, I'm communicating with someone right now. I have no idea who he is or what country he's in. Do you even know if he's a he? Let's see what else we have. How well do trefoils? How trefoils? Trefoils. We just lost all to internet. We can all do it again. Absolutely. Totally. Janice Phillips. Yes, Twilight the Mist. I think we're just about to the point where all the dust in the galactic arm will no longer be blocking our juice coming from the galactic center. Green-eyed crow. I had a prison pen pal. You're probably not alone. I don't think it's uncommon. Pen pals were great. I never had a pen pal. Cliff High says we're already out of Kali Yuga by about 3 centuries. You know, I don't know, man. I don't know. You know when I think of the Kali Yuga, you know what I think about? I think about mind control. That's what I think about. Oh, we're in this time, right? And we're in this time of suffering, and it's not going to end for thousands of fucking years. Really? Yes, and here's all the Vedic arithmetic for that equation. It's like, yeah, man, I'm tapped out of the Kali Yuga. I'm tapped out of it. You know, hold on to it if you want to. You say, look around, there's all kinds of suffering. It's got to be the Kali Yuga. Let's see. What else we have here? A lot of prison talk. Now we're sharing some astrological data points. Hi, Joan. We have another Joan here. Hello to you. In high school, I had a pen pal from Portugal. That's cool. That's not my reality. What did Nicole say? That's not my reality. I'm with you. I'm with you. Exactly about mind control. It's my biggest fear that the wrong people are finding out about your gifts. No. Well, we promise not to share your gifts. Besides, we're going to have a front row seat with your gifts apparently on Saturday. Heather Botkin says, Fourth started off with a bang of transformer blowing, knocking out power. Grateful it's in the morning, opposed to later. There you go. Fireworks are. Thank you, Tom, for putting that up there. You can become a member of the 11th house. Absolutely. Absolutely. Over on locals, I'm going to post something today. I used to write the dead folk in my diary as a kid. Boy, you were weird. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you. That's interesting. That's interesting. I was not a great letter writer. Not a great letter writer. Let's see. Any new comments? We're about to start breathing fresh air and expansion again. The day will come. The day will come. Hope is checking in from Scotland. Cold, wet, windy, freezing, and green. Sounds delightful. I am weird, and it's fine. We're all weird. We're all weird here. Still can't read my own handwriting. I'm in the same boat, John. I have the worst handwriting. Okay, let's get into some of the astro weather for today, shall we? Now that I'm an hour deep into this. An hour deep, and we do the reset every day. Who needs a reset? Just come to my show. You get a reset every day. All right. What is hip? Tell me. If you think you know. What is hip? Tell me. People that hip, baby. We jammed the Tower Power yesterday. All right. It's a good day for a celebration. We got that moon squaring Neptune. We talked about that. You know, I think the bulk of the show so far has been the moon Neptune square. Right? We're waxing poetically. We're waxing poetically about this idea of freedom, responsibility, loyalty, community. You know, all these things, right? We're kind of waxing poetically about it. To me, that's moon Neptune square. You know, we're having a, rose-colored glasses moment here at the beginning of the day. And it's okay. It's okay, right? We amidst all of the cynicism, amidst all of the divide and conquer, amidst all of the illusion and chicanery, we can indulge in a few moments of optimism, good faith, goodwill. I don't like to use the word hope. It's a little weak. But we can indulge in it. Right? Because that stuff out there is always going to be there. But how you deal with it and how you interact with it, that's up to you. I had a conversation with another client that I'll be talking with in a couple of weeks. And it's always great to have these conversations. I learn so much about people and their lives. As much as it is perhaps valuable for them to be on their end of the conversation. It's almost as valuable to me. In fact, and sometimes even more valuable, because I get to learn about people's lives in very intimate ways. And I get to hear stories. And sometimes those stories are tragic, and sometimes they're really inspiring. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who, prior to 2020, was about as left and liberal and progressive as you could get. And here we are, 2024, and she had no idea that she would be this person 4 years later. And of course, she went through the COVID machine. When we had our event here, what was it, 2021? I think it was the second event, right, in 2021. Hold on a second. It was 2020. It was 2020, and we had the second event here. And I was really into this idea of the Janice ritual. And if you know Janice is the two-faced god, right? And they used to have these Janice rituals way back in the day, and they usually were they would take place during a time of war, and literally there would be like a temple of sorts, right? And you literally would kind of walk into the temple and through the mouth of this head, right? And then you would walk out the other side of the other head and the mouth on the other side, and that somewhere in between you would become somebody different, and you would be a different person on the other side of the Janice ritual. And I thought about the Janice ritual as it related to the mask, and that that the mask was part of the Janice ritual, right? That we were in this thing, and that at some point the mask would come off, and that who you were on the other side of the mask was going to be meaningful. It would mean something, right? So I was really kind of obsessed with this idea of the Janice ritual, and so we actually did a ritual here in the Hill Country, at the Stonehenge of the Hill Country. Somebody asked me in chat if I moved to Kerrville because of the Stonehenge of the Hill Country. No, I did not. So we did this ritual, and it was really a ritual, right? And it was with masks, and we went in through one gate, right? And we circumnavigated the inside of Stonehenge, and then we left with through another gate. And when you went in, the mask was on, and when you left, the mask was off, right? So this was something I actually put some thought into. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this client went through the Janice ritual, right? She started off as one person before 2020, and here in 2024, she's a 180, right? That's what I'm talking about. And again, I'm bringing it up because, you would say that somebody like that in 2020, based on their political affiliation, now they have some other stuff in their history which would lend you to believe that there was a neo in there waiting to break out. But if you just knew them by their political beliefs in 2020 or pre-2020, you would say that person's an NPC. Clearly not an NPC. Somebody who took the mask off and realized what was going on. I actually want to get this person on as a guest because they sound really interesting. This is the moon Neptune square. This is kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like for a brief moment in time, let's just celebrate, right? Let's celebrate for now before we have to, go back into the fray of the battle, right? Let's just celebrate for now that we've come through something, and a lot of you are wiser, smarter, healthier as a result of it. You may have taken on some collateral damage in other parts of your life, right? We're having a rose-colored glasses moment. Celebrate the fact that you came through that moment, that you're intact, and you've learned and you've grown, and you may have even helped people along the way, right? That's part of it. So I'm looking on the bright side of the moon Neptune square. I'm not looking at the deception. You can be self-deceived as well with a moon Neptune square. I do think at a family level, the moon Neptune square is legit, right? It's a total legit square. The moon is in Gemini, so we're talking about siblings, extended family members. I don't know. We've talked about it before. Maybe this is one of those days where you pick up the phone, you call them and say, "Hey, just want to wish you a happy 4th of July." What the fuck you calling me for? I told you never to call me again. Well, it's because we're family. Well, it's one of those days. Moon sextile Chiron. Hey, not a bad time for it. Maybe somebody's ready to hear that. Maybe somebody's ready to, have that moment. You never know. Don't let pride get in the way. You may make that call and somebody may break down and say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I've missed your voice." Right. And, they may be all jabbed up and shit. And, they may be having health difficulties. And you can say, "I told you so." Right. This is one of those days. Pick up the phone. Make the call. And you can say to yourself, "Well, I knew that was going to happen. I shouldn't have done it." You never know. Right? You never know. When you do something, it's kind of like a depth charge. You never know how far it's going to go down or where it's going to go off. 2 days, 3 days, 2 months from now, 2 weeks from now, that phone call, they may not be able to get that out of their head. Right? And it may fundamentally change them in a way that you don't even understand. So if you're going to do something like that, right, you got to do it unconditionally and just say, "Hey, look, thinking about you today. I remember the times as a kid where, we used to run around and hide when Dad got too drunk and started firing fireworks at us." Right? Like, it's a day for that. It's a day for it. The moon's coming out of a square with Saturn. What is 6 degrees? So those kinds of conversations may not necessarily be met with warmth and gratitude initially, but it might. Right? And I do like the moon sextile to Chiron. That's like attending to the wounds of the family. And Chiron is always about taking a risk. And I think today, the risk is well worth it. Tonight, we'll have that balsamic moon in Cancer, and it should be a good night for fireworks and such. But it's kind of sad too, though, right? Like this balsamic moon for this 4th of July. And I just wonder if this is like the last 4th of July that we'll experience in this way because of the position of the moon and how things are going politically. Hell, if Trump is in office, every day will be fucking 4th of July, right? With the Celebrate America exposition in Iowa. He's taking a page out of Tartaria. Right? Trump is going to become the god of the new Tartaria. there'll be these unusual sculptures of this man with this funny hairline that future generations will scratch their heads and go, "Who the fuck is this?" No, but I do feel like this balsamic moon, there's kind of a melancholy in some ways about it, right? Because I don't think the country will be fundamentally the same past November. It won't. It just won't. There's no way in hell this country is going to be the same. I don't care who's president. So it's not going to be the same. And it's kind of the the long pangs of the new birth and whatever the new America will be on the other side of all this. So there is something very sentimental and nostalgic about this 4th of July as we move into the evening. Now, this moon will eventually morph into a new moon come Saturday and Sunday, right? So I think it's a good time to have our party on Saturday with this new moon out here in Kerrville. If you're in Kerrville, stop by. It almost feels in some ways that I would say Saturday is more like the 4th of July, but it kind of is in some ways because of the presence of the new moon and Venus and Cancer and all those Cancerian values. There is a very strong hint of nostalgia. Now, the powers that be have alerted us that there may be suspicious activity on the 4th of July, that certain groups may try to upset the celebration. And I've been talking about this for a while. And I've been wrong every year, and I've been glad I'm wrong, right? So the one year that I probably don't address it, it happens. But I just have to tell you that the FBI is warning you. So from the FBI to me, I am now warning. Be on the alert for suspicious activity. If you see somebody suspicious or you see something suspicious, say something, do something. Call your local authorities, rat them out. Wouldn't it be great? I had this fantasy one time. Wouldn't it be great to stumble upon somebody who's in the process of doing a false flag and fuck it up? Like, that was my fantasy one time. I think I had that fantasy in the early 2000s. But to me, that'd be great. Like, oh, what are you guys doing over here? You're not supposed to be here. You're not. What is this? What is going on here? I got my cell phone out. Yeah, you mind if I ask you a few questions? Anyway, yeah, it just feels nostalgic. The energy feels nostalgic. But I also feel a little bit hopeful that Moon Neptune square, rose-colored glasses. Mercury's in Leo, right? So we can make dramatic pronouncements with Mercury and Leo. It's opposing Pluto still. When I think this Mercury-Pluto opposition, Joe Biden just pops into my head, right? And the obstinance of Joe Biden and the Biden family. I still think he's going to be on the ticket. I think it's going to be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and because the machinations in order to move him off are problematic, and people are talking about a Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer ticket. Well, let's just examine that for a moment, shall we? You have a white man and you have a white woman who are now going to theoretically be the face of the Democratic Party and take on Donald Trump. How do you think Kamala Harris and everybody that is associated with Kamala Harris, when I say associated, I'm not talking about her husband and some of these other people, right? I'm talking about the Joy Reids of the world. I'm talking about the what's her name? The big gal who ran for governor, Stacey Abrams, right? The Ocasio-Cortezes, the Ayanna Presleys, the Cori Bushes, right? How do you think they're going to feel about that? How are the Yaz Queens going to react to a Whitmer Newsom ticket? Not well. Not well. In order to do that, they would literally have to sit down with all of them and basically cut deals with them and say, here's what's going to happen. We're going to go in this direction and you're going to support it. And we're going to make it really lucrative on your end to support it. That includes Oprah. She's a tastemaker. She's a Yaz queen, right? And all of a sudden, we'll start whistling a different tune. But if they do that, it's so disingenuous. It's a big lie, right? So even if they somehow convince the gatekeepers that represent Kamala, it'll ring really false, incredibly false. And even if they say to Kamala, well, we'll put you in the Supreme Court. You'll be a Supreme Court justice. That's one of the greatest things that a person can aspire to. Get more power than the president. You think Kamala's going to want that? You know, no, Kamala doesn't want to fucking be Supreme Court justice, right? Hang out, behind closed doors, wear a black robe. She doesn't want that. Kamala Harris wants to be in the spotlight. This is a woman that was a socialite in San Francisco in the society pages. Supreme Court is a fucking drag for this woman. She wants to be president. So I'm not sure she'll settle for that deal. They got a problem on their hands. So I think they're going to try to run Biden all the way through to the end with Kamala dragging anchor. That's just a byproduct, I think, of this Mercury-Pluto opposition. Now, I could be completely wrong, and somehow they can, meet Joe Biden's demands or whatever. But Kamala still has to become president, right? For a brief period of time, she's got to be president. And if she's president, then she's like, well, if I'm good enough to be president now, why can't I be good enough to be on the fucking ticket? Answer me that. So they're in a bit of a bind. They created it, though. That was their problem, right? They brought her on the ticket. They could have gone in a different direction. They didn't do it. So now they brought it on themselves with Biden. He is a demented version of Chauncey Gardner from Being There. That's who Joe Biden is. He's Chauncey Gardner, and he's demented, right? That's what he is. And and it's so cynical. The whole thing is so cynical because we've had to watch this for 4 years, and anybody with eyes to see knows it's fucking fake, right? He's not running anything. And whoever he is, or the various versions of him, aren't even real. And when they do run him out, he's a drooling mess. We've known this for 4 years, and we've lived with the fucking lie for 4 years. And we've had the media prop him up for 4 years. It's disgusting. And how we're viewed by the rest of the world around this does us no favors. Sun-Venus conjunction, Cancer coming in, trining Saturn. So I really like this because it's grounded. This is a grounded aspect. And with the trine to Neptune, it's like grounded with a dream. Grounded with a dream. And we've got this new moon coming up. What's your dream? What is your dream? What do you hope to, or what do you intend to water and feed and tend? What is it? Do you want your own place? Do you want your own property? Right? Do you want to reconcile? Do you want to heal? Do you want independence? What is it? Right? This new moon in Cancer, perfect for it. It's solid. It's, especially if it's within the scope of your capability, and maybe reaching out just a little bit beyond it, because that's what a dream is. I think this is a really interesting weekend. Are we going to have any false flags? The FBI told me to tell you to watch out for that. Be on the lookout. What else we have? I mean, I really like, the Venus Uranus sextile. To me, that's like, this is how I see the barbecue on Saturday, right? Chattarians and Curvillians. Mix and match. The weird Jello mold. Why not, right? Why not? That's the Venus Uranus sextile. Because you never know, right? I may sit down with some of these neighbors, like, motherfucking interesting. You should come over more, right? Like, you just never know. So it's an interesting time to not be afraid to commingle with people that are different than you. Don't be afraid of it. It's okay. It's really okay, especially during these aspects. Excuse me. Real quick, Venus square Chiron. That's legit. That's happening. Will continue to happen through the 4th of July weekend. That's one of those aspects where you can heal relationships, but you can also create situations where the relationship will need to be healed, right? And it usually results in, with Cancer, there's this kind of thing with Cancer where sometimes we just take things for granted, right? When we think of our mothers, like when we're young, we just take for granted that they do what they do. Right? It kind of goes along with the Cancerian territory. But when we really step back and look at it and go, wow, this person's doing a lot, right? They're doing a lot. And I'm not as aware or appreciative of what they do, right? And that Chiron Venus square, I think, speaks to that. And so what you want to do is you want to let people know that you are appreciative of what they do, right? You don't want to just take it for granted that, your clothes get washed and folded and all that shit, as a metaphor, right? And it can be healing. It can be very healing. The worst thing you want to do is to not do that and to just take things for granted. And even if you bring it up, I'll say this is the caveat, right? Even if you bring it up, get ready for, well, it's about time you noticed. It's about time you paid attention. And you're like, holy shit, right? Here I am. I'm giving you a moment of appreciation. And now I got to hear the static in the attic. And like, okay, all right, I'll hear it. I'll hear it. You're right. You're right. That's why I'm sharing this with you now. That's, don't take it personally. It's just like, man, I'm just telling you how much I appreciate you, care about you, and respect the things that you do. And now I got to get in your bullshit. Just, it's okay. It's okay. Hear it out. All right, let's get into our True Hemp Science for the day. Remember, if you use the code word July 4 over at True Hemp Science, you'll get 20% off of your True Hemp Science order. So some of the best CBD products are available over there. And our good friend Chris will be with us this Saturday at our gathering. So the man himself going to chew the fat with us. All right, here's your True Hemp Science star of the day. Now, this is a C-rated chart. It's about as low as I'll go when it comes to rating a chart with a particular birth time that may not necessarily be the exact birth time. I won't go lower than a C, but hey, it works. Calvin Coolidge, C, right? CC. And what can we infer about Calvin Coolidge's chart? Well, for instance, he has Pluto on the midheaven, which is right there. And how does he become president? Warren Harding dies. He's the vice president. Calvin Coolidge is kind of the Thomas Massie of his day, by the way. Right? And he has Saturn in Capricorn. So he has some very Capricornian traits in his chart. What do I mean by that? Calvin Coolidge basically started at the bottom. He started as a mayor, and he just kept working his way up to the top, right? That's your Saturn in Capricorn. And eventually he becomes vice president. And then Warren Harding dies. And so he takes over about halfway through the term. And Coolidge was conservative, right? When we think of Cancer, right, we think of this whole idea of conserving resources. He was the most fiscally conservative president, maybe ever. And it's because of Coolidge that America gets to experience the Roaring 20s, right? With one of the most prosperous times in the history of this country. And it's because the government is leaving shit alone, right? He's staying out of the way. And what's also interesting about his chart is how death marks his chart. It plays a huge role in the life of Calvin Coolidge. First of all, Warren Harding dies, right? Warren Harding dies and he becomes president. While he's president, during his second term, his son dies. And it's a crushing moment. And the way his son dies is quite strange. It looks like kind of a minor accident and winds up getting infected. I think it's a really rapid case of sepsis that they can't stop. And his son dies while he's in office. And then after that, his wife dies. Right. So Pluto being the highest planet in his chart, and it marks his life. Right, destiny, fate, whatever you want to call it. Pluto really is the lord of his chart in a lot of ways. Even though he's a Virgo rising, it determines everything about Coolidge. And he was eligible to actually run for another term, and he probably would have easily won had he ran, but he didn't. So he steps away from politics and basically lives a very private and quiet life. Now, what's also interesting about him is his 11th house. And you have all this Cancer, all these Cancerian planets in his 11th house, and his true node in Gemini. And Calvin Coolidge is really the first media president. He's the first president that uses radio to reach out to people, to reach out to the American public. He's FDR before FDR in the fireside chats. FDR got that from Coolidge, right? So he's really the first media president. And not only that, but he's also the first president that taps into Hollywood, right? He's the first president that gets Hollywood stars to advocate for him and endorse him. And you can kind of see this, right, with Jupiter and Leo. Like there would be that kind of a connection. And even this, massive 11th house, which is all about groups, associations, kind of a big cast of characters. You know, I may be mistaken, but let me just do this real quick. I think I read this somewhere with Coolidge. Let me just see this. Yeah, so Calvin Coolidge had this connection with Edward Bernays. And let me see if I can find it. A fascinating website with, on Bernays here. Let's see. Yeah, so here we go. Coolidge, for better or worse, is also, and this goes along with the celebrity thing, right? Like Edward Bernays is brought into the Coolidge presidential election. So here it is. Bernays was asked to bring a celebrity group to visit the White House and demonstrate Coolidge's warm, sympathetic personality. He decided that stage people symbolize warmth, extroversion, and bohemian camaraderie, and set up a star-studded breakfast at the White House. He arranged for a group of actors to take the midnight train from New York to Washington after they finished their shows. The cast included Al Jolson, Ed Wynn, the Dolly Sisters, Charlotte Green, Raymond Hitchcock, and other big stars at the time. Mrs. Coolidge greeted the guests. "I have met you all across the footlights," she said, "but it's not the same as greeting you here." The president was not quite as welcoming. So this is clearly not Coolidge's idea, right? He was practically inarticulate and of no movement of any kind, agitated, his deadpan face, Bernays later said. So Coolidge wasn't really into this. You have to think that somebody inside the Coolidge campaign was, was aiming for this. When the group lined up for breakfast photos, the president remained grim as ever. After breakfast, the group moved to the White House lawn where Al Jolson sang "Keep Coolidge," which he had composed for the occasion. Everybody sang except for the president. Despite Coolidge's demeanor, celebrity star power seems to have worked. Newspaper headlines reported actor eats cake with the Coolidges. President nearly laughs. Guests crack dignified jokes, sing song, and pledge to support Coolidge. Probably no one looked at Coolidge again in the same way. Coolidge had the countenance of an undertaker, right? He was grim, right? He was grim. I mean, this is a guy who, ultimately would lose his kid, but he was that was his nature, right? He was grim. And he probably didn't think this was a very good idea. Somebody in his campaign thought it was a good idea. And his wife probably loved it. She was like, finally, I get to have some fucking fun around this place, right? So, let's credit that to Edward Bernays. Gemini, True Note in Gemini, he's the first radio president. He's kind of the first president that uses, Bernays as kind of a, social engineer. I don't think he liked it. It was clear he didn't like it. Chiron and Aries. Yeah, he's wounded, right? He's a wounded dude. And especially in the 8th house, he'll carry that wound with him for the rest of his life, especially with his progeny. And you can just see, right? Like he's got his moon is in Gemini, but he's got Mars in Cancer, Venus in Cancer, Sun in Cancer, Mercury in Cancer, even where's his Uranus? Zoom in on. Looks like Uranus right at the beginning of Leo. Is that right? Yeah, right at the beginning of Leo. But he's, he's very Cancerian. He's grim. He's a grim man. But honestly, let me see. Where's his Mars? His Mars is at the same degree as my Mars, for Cancer. No wonder I like him. He's got Saturn and Capricorn. No wonder I like him. He's got Uranus and Leo. No wonder I like him. I think Coolidge is how a president should be. Bland. He should be bland. He should be bland, not dumb, but not ostentatious. Shouldn't be in front of a fucking camera every fucking day. Right? Shouldn't be on Twitter. Just keep your head down. Take care of business. That's like Thomas Massie. That's like Thomas Massie. Be boring. Be boring. Do your job. Right? Smile every now and then. Don't fuck up. Be respectable. And rein in the excesses of government spending. That's it. That's all you got to do. I think he's the last best American president. FDR was a shit show. Let's see who else we have in there. FDR, I think FDR follows Coolidge, right? FDR is a shit show. He's there for 3 fucking terms. Truman's a shit show. And by the way, FDR and Truman were both Democrats. Coolidge was a Republican. So the country moves away from Republican candidates for what? Almost 5 terms, which is almost unprecedented. Truman's a shit show, man. He's just like, whatever. Eisenhower is a manager. He's a manager. That's all he had to do. He just had to manage the wealth, the growth, the expansion, and try not to get us into any more wars, which I think he did a reasonably good job at. But it's not like he did anything tremendous. He was a game manager. And look at who shows up along the way. Well, I think Nixon could have been a great president. And Nixon got fucked over, right? So what is Nixon's a Capricorn. Coolidge is Saturn and Capricorn. Thomas Massie's a Capricorn, right? There's something about Capricorn that understands how to run things and is not emotional about it. And even though he was a Cancer, right? Saturn plays a huge role in this chart. Anyway, there you go. True Hemp Science star of the day. Last best American president, with the exception of Nixon with an asterisk. And I don't know, Trump has too much. There's too much good and too much bad about Trump. Right? There's a lot of good about Trump. There's a lot of bad about Trump. Omnibus bill, Operation Warp Speed, bringing BlackRock into the government, bad. Right? Economic growth, good. Border control, good. Right? So I can't really go 100% stamp down on Trump. That's just me. All right. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me rant. Hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope everybody has an absolutely fantastic weekend. Treat each other well. Everything you have and everything you need is inside of you. As long as you understand that, and as long as you are able to connect with Most High, which is your higher self, your representation of God through you via your soul, which is really what the lesson is all about, right? It's all there for you. All you got to do is just access it, dialogue, make it a part of your daily life. You have it all there. You have everything you need inside of you. That's it. All right. Take good care. Happy birthday, America. We'll see you guys on Sunday night. Bye for now. Oh, no. I take that back. Russ tomorrow. Russ tomorrow over on Rumble. There you go. Headset the record straight. All right. See ya.